So there are two elements that kind of help us not come to an answer, but at least continue to experiment with venture approaches to give our investors the types of returns they want. One is our LP base. In fact, this morning there was an article in Venture Wire regarding interest of LPs in coming into the life sciences. And the commentary was basically saying a third of the LPs that have invested in this space are no longer going to invest in this space. A third are probably going to stay. And now there's a resurgence of another third that are saying, let's just pay attention to this space. Since no one's been investing, it must represent some kind of an opportunity. And even within that, finding the right ones that aren't doing the historical check the boxes of what they're looking for versus those that understand the risk of investing in innovation and investing in early stage and knowing what may be required to make these things successful is a smaller pool. And for us, finding that pool is important. In our case, we believe we found those types of investors, and we don't have a large limited partner base, but they are made up of institutional investors and family offices, and large family offices that want some kind of life representation for their family office. And the other group we have is our strategic investors that have a relationship with us that's unencumbered. So we have the likes of Astellas, Takeda, Roche, Lilly, Glaxo, Quintiles, PPD, and I'm probably missing one or two, that are investors in our funds. They make up a small percentage of our limited partner base, but they give us huge access to ideas, huge access to, will this work if we take this kind of preclinical approach? If we do a virtual company, which we've done, could it play out if we're able to tap into this, and can we do the trials that you might want to look at them if we want to sell them? So that mix is for a GP or for a fund is really very important, so that when you get to, for Panicos, for example, that was for some investors, it was a 12-year investment. So you have to have patient LPs that will stay with you. And that hockey stick, which we all know that amount of fee being paid out before you get returns, they've got to be able to appreciate that ours could be at the very end, and they've got to see two or three funds repeat that in a way that validates your strategy, and sticking to the strategy is kind of hard. But the experiments we're doing include the virtual one. It includes companies like Walters, where we're maybe a small VC in it, but we're working with other family offices to move something forward. To a large one, we just did Tesaro, which is a $101 million Series A investment to build a fully integrated oncology company. And then on the other side of it, we just did Balance Therapeutics, which is a virtual company doing Down syndrome in cognitive improvement. And you've got this, and I can name about 4 or 5 others, and we're just trying to experiment with better ways to work through the FDA and continue to keep our LPs happy to continue to invest in innovation. And the last point I'll make is our industry is just not going to exist without innovation, and we're just big believers in that. But finding our way through the regulatory hurdles, the capital markets, and the corporate scenarios is just something that's going to be a way of life, probably forever.
Thanks, Art. Well, you can't talk about a startup company without an exit plan. So let's hear from Ted Tenthoff, a biotech analyst with Piper Jaffray. Ted, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how exit plans have changed for BioTechs since the 2008 crisis.
Great, it's my pleasure, Lynn, and thanks everybody for being here. Just maybe as a very brief background about myself, I've been senior equity analyst at Piper Jaffray for the last 8 years, focused in biotechnology, and for 5 years at Robbie Stevens prior to that. I actually got my start on Wall Street in the medical technology space. So this is really kind of all I've ever done for a living, which I think probably has some pros from an experience standpoint, but maybe some limitations as well. And I think it's a really key question that you bring up, Lynn, because I think there's been dramatic shifts in how exit strategy are not only impacting how investors invest their funds, but also in terms of how companies are financing and really how this whole cycle works. And I think the primary challenge when markets fell apart back in 2008 was obviously access to capital and a constriction of capital. And I think a good outcome of this, if I may just start with this point, is that I do think there was some pruning of some deadwood, and I do think that some managements out there had to get much more efficient in how they were deploying capital. And in some ways that actually may align more with investor interest. But I do believe that for the most part, obviously this was a tough time. And I think what it really did was it made biotechnology, if this is possible to believe, even riskier. And it did that in a couple ways. You know, many companies had to essentially focus scarce resources on the most advanced asset. And what it ended up doing, you know, was decreasing investment in research, decreasing investment in pipeline, and as a result really made a lot of these companies more binary in risk. So that's where I think the space itself became significantly more risky. And that really dovetailed at a time when I think public investors were also becoming significantly more risk averse. And what this did was take premiums out of a lot of the publicly traded names, and again, exacerbated that drawing up of capital in what is frankly a very capital-intensive sector. You know, during this time frame, and frankly during this recovery since 2008, I think healthcare has largely, up until this year, I'd argue, been an underperformer. And I think part of that is some of the headwinds that we face, like FDA and healthcare reform, but part of it was just getting this cycle back on track. And you know, I think Lynn showed some examples where we are seeing increased investment in early funding, so I think that's very encouraging. I really think the greatest victim of this whole constriction of capital, though, has been innovation. And you touched on some of these points, but I keep thinking about it, you know, if the whole industry is relying on biotechnology for new discoveries, and pharma's contend today about pipeline, where are we going to be in 3 or 5 or 7 years as a result of this decreased investment in discovery and in pipeline as a result of the 2008 financial crisis? So I think those companies, frankly, that have been able to continue to access capital, sometimes in very creative ways, sometimes from the government, but those companies that have continued to invest in research, I think could ultimately come out of this as significantly more valuable assets. The third component of this is obviously big pharma and big biotech. And, you know, during this whole downturn, M&A and partnerships arguably became the most lucrative exit strategies, if not the only option in some cases. So I think, you know, pharma played a very important role in its ability to continue to invest in products. And you look at it, you know, proteolytics, Calistoga, Plexicon, that's mentioned in just a few of the very significant deals that have been done and acquisitions that have been taking place. And I think really getting to the crux of the issue here is that pharma has a fundamentally different job than investors, whose job is obviously to buy low and sell high. Pharma's job is to discover and develop, and even more now, partner and buy new drugs that will contribute to the top line and enhance profitability. And I think that, if anything, this constriction of capital has created an increase in the divide between those two valuations, with IPO public investors here and maybe pharma M&A on the higher side of that. And even though within, and maybe the last point I would make before we probably open it up for questions would be that even within the investing side, I think there's real friction. And Art, I know that you experience this, but you know, the VCs during the financial crisis were requiring liquidity, and we're looking for that either through M&A or through the very few or non-existent IPOs.